I really look forward to making these videos as I prepare for my Oceania trip. But this one is very special in its own right. Let's talk about Tokelau. Tokelau. Yeah, I really been looking forward to this one. So the first thing I usually bring up when I talk to people about my trip, when I mention Tokelau, I usually ask them, have you ever heard of Tokelau? Tokelau is an archipelago north of Samoa. It comprises of 3 islands, 4, I'll talk about that later. Although they are self-governing, they are an overseas territory of New Zealand. Now, okay, Anthony, what about Tokelau? Why do you want to go? Yeah. Okay, here we go. So to elaborate what Tokelau is, it is a Polynesian archipelago. And the reason why I want to go is to immerse into the culture. It is a Polynesian culture with a Polynesian-based language. And it's something that intrigues me and something that I want to be able to experience firsthand. Of course, through who? The most important element of my travels, through the people. Everyday Tokelauans. Which brings me to number 2. I want to immerse with the people there. And because they are small islands, it will not be difficult to do that. You see, Tokelau I like to consider way off the beaten path, especially in the Pacific, as there are very infrequent to very few visitors who take the time to go to the islands. But something I've come to learn and understand through some of the Tokelauans I met on social media, although the islands are Tokelauan, each island is distinct from one another, which means each island has a distinct characteristic about it that isn't the same on other islands. I hope I'm explaining that correctly. And leaving the best for last, Tokelau is one of my top 5 anticipated stops on my entire Oceania Pacific Islands trip of 2024. Now, I do have to break down how and why I've even heard about Tokelau. You see, before I visited Tuvalu in 2018, it became one of my top anticipated desired travel destinations of my Pacific Islands trip of 2018. And when I went, and even after I left, it became one of my favorite destinations in my travels. But see, I have done my reading about Tokelau prior to Tuvalu. It was in Tuvalu where people kept referencing and talking about Tokelau very often, in a way that they referenced Tokelau as like Tuvalu's cousin, with very many similarities between the 2 archipelagos. And the more and more I kept talking about Tokelau with Tuvaluans, the more curious I became and the more I wanted to go. And 5 years later, since my time in Tuvalu, Tokelau has also jumped up to the top of my highly anticipated stops on my trip. Now, I made mention that visiting Tokelau is off the beaten path, which means there are very few visitors that have been able to go. Well, I have to make mention that it is not easy to just go to Tokelau. It comes with a lot of hard work. It comes with a process, which kind of reminds me of Nauru, but maybe a little more complex. So what will it take to go? Well, in order to visit Tokelau, you have to be in Samoa. There is a liaison office in Apia, the capital of Samoa, where you can go in and apply for a visa and get all the paperwork and documentation taken care of through New Zealand and through Tokelau in Samoa in order to make the trip to Tokelau. Now, there are no airports in Tokelau, so the only way to get there is by boat, which is a 24-hour trip on, what's the name of the boat? This boat. Now, from what I read, Tokelauans have first dibs on a seat on the boat, which means a traveler like me, it'd be like hit or miss, and that's okay. Because to me, it's worth it. But I have been blessed to have made contact on social media, sharing my cultural intentions and passion and desire to visit Tokelau, to meet the people that are helping to guide me on my onward trip to Tokelau. And I just have to acknowledge and continue to thank them as they help guide me on my journey to their home island. To talk about intentions, as I do with all these vlogs, as I mentioned before, my intentions are to immerse with the people, to learn their language, to learn their customs, their traditions, their way of life, their dance, which looks very similar to the fatele in Tuvalu. A lot of things that I've done before in my Pacific travels that I will continue to do, but respecting Tokelau like any other place as unique to its own, with of course many similarities that I'm familiar with across the Pacific. But I will learn, immerse, and document realities in Tokelau, including climate change and of course the reality of islanders leaving their home islands for many reasons. Now, earlier in the video I made a snicker at 3 Tokelauan islands, and while this is a touchy topic that I try to tread carefully on, there are technically 4 Tokelauan islands, the 4th being called Olohenga, which is now called Swain's Island, part of American Samoa. It is controversial and it's a little political, but to go into the culture and the people, I like to give respect to those who are no longer in their home islands. It's part of what I learn, and it also becomes part of what I document. Aloni. Whew, this is a long shot for my dear Tokelauans here on Oahu. While I was in Hawaii, I tried to connect with 3rd, 4th generation Tokelauans who were of Olohengan heritage, who now live in Hawaii. There are 3 Tokelauan atolls. I learned about a 4th called Olohengan. You see, Olohengans many years ago got displaced from the islands. Most of them live in Auckland. Some of them ended up in Hawaii. And I had attempted to document some of the heritage and lineage of Tokelauans in Hawaii to Tokelau to connect into my cultural experience in Tokelau. Now, this fell through because there are not many Tokelauans in Hawaii, and I tried to reach a couple of contacts but never got a response, and that's okay. And 2, I got really swamped with my Native Hawaiian project, including other projects in Palau and the Marshall Islands. Again, that's okay, because I have the knowledge of the bigger picture about Olohenga, which I will find a way to acknowledge down the line. And I don't typically bring this up in any of my other vlogs because when it comes to time, it varies. But how long will I spend in Tokelau? I mean, just like anywhere else, as long as I'm able to be able to spend time with Tokelauans, to learn from them, to document. But it does really depend on funding, which, to be quite honest, is very tight. Just like I mentioned on my vlog of Samoa, from now to the beginning of my trip, which is about 4 months away, I'm seeking out ways to fund my trip through grants and sponsors. But for the time being, if you're watching this and you want to help fund my trip, I have set up a GoFundMe that's particular to this trip and the work that I'll be doing. I have a Ko-Fi, which is set up for one-time donation. If you're based in the States, I have a Venmo. And last but not least, more particular to supporting me and seeing work that I do behind the scenes, I have a Patreon. Anything and everything helps because it not only supports me, but it supports the people across the islands, including Tokelau. Well, because this is an extensive Pacific Islands, Oceania trip, it doesn't end in Tokelau. So what's after Tokelau? Well, after Tokelau, I will have to return to Samoa. And depending on when I'm able to go to Tokelau, I may end up spending more time in Samoa, or I may have had my time spent in Samoa ready for my next stop, which would be Fiji. And I have to tell you, my return to Fiji and the reasons why I'm going back and my intentions there is really extensive, and that I can't wait to share in a separate vlog. Although it would be hit or miss, there is a slight chance that maybe I can hitch a sail to Uveamo Futuna, Wallis and Futuna, a French overseas collectivity of France, but a Polynesian archipelago that I really am curious to visit. Even though it's part of Fiji, giving respect to an intended stop in Rotuma, which is a Polynesian island part of Fiji, and of course my long-awaited intended return to Tuvalu. Yeah, it feels like there's so much to talk about and cover in such little time. Again, I have 4 months from the time of recording up until my trip, but there's so many reasons why I like to make these videos. It's not only to share why I'm going, it's not just to share my intentions, but to establish a connection with community in these places, including Tokelau. Well, these vlogs are what I like to consider prologues because they're just as vital and part of the story as the stories themselves when I'm in the place. In this case, in Tokelau. I thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for supporting me. I appreciate everything. If you want to help fund my trip, I have left the links below. There's so much in store for this upcoming trip, so much to look forward to, and I can't put into words how excited I am to share with all of you. I am a voyager after all, and the slogan that I like to share, this is what I do. For Tokelau, for Oceania, one ocean, one people.